Welcome to BeFM Drama, where we turn great works of English literature into gripping radio. I'm your host, Joshua Cornwell, and this week we're bringing you our 5-part adaptation of The Adventure of Charles Augustus Milverton, a classic Sherlock Holmes detective story from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. This thrilling and unusual tale from the Sherlock Holmes canon sets the legendary detective against one of his most appalling foes, Mr. Milverton, an evil professional blackmailer who builds his fortune by buying embarrassing private documents and personal letters from powerful men and women, and then threatening to release them in the most damaging way possible if his victims refuse to pay him large sums of money to get back their own stolen documents. The risk of scandalous public exposure was a fate worse than death in the image and propriety-obsessed culture of Victorian England, and Milverton coldly takes advantage of that culture to enrich himself on the ruin of his victims. So join me as we dive into this exciting tale together here on BeFM Drama. It has been years since the incidents of which I speak about took place, and yet it is with hesitancy that I mention them at all. For a long time, even with the utmost discretion and care, it would have been impossible for me to make the facts public. But now that the main person involved is beyond the reach of human law, I believe that with due care and the suppression of certain names, the story can be told in such a way as to injure no one. It records an absolutely unique experience in the career both of Mr. Sherlock Holmes and of myself. The listener will excuse me for not revealing the date or any other facts that might help trace the actual events. Holmes and I had been out for one of our long walks and returned to Baker Street at about 6 o'clock on a cold, frosty winter's evening. As Holmes turned up the lamp, the light fell upon a card on the table. He glanced at it and then, with a grunt of disgust, threw it on the floor. I picked it up and read, Charles Augustus Milverton, Appledore Towers, Hampstead, Agent. I turned to Holmes with the note in my hand. Who is he?
The worst man in London.
Holmes sighed and sat down in his easy chair, stretching his legs out before the fire.
Is anything written on the back of the card?
I turned it over, reading what I found there. Will call at 6:30. C.A.M.
Huh, well, he's about due then. Do you feel a creeping, shrinking sensation, Watson, where you stand before the snakes in the zoo and see the slithery, venomous creatures with their deadly eyes and wicked faces? That's what I feel of when I think of Milverton. I've been directly involved with over 50 murders during my career, but the worst of them never gave me the repulsion I have for this fellow. And yet I can't avoid doing business with him. Indeed, here he is at my invitation.
But who is he?
I'll tell you, Watson. He is the king of all the blackmailers. Heaven help the man, and still more the woman, whose secret and reputation come into the power of Milverton. With a smiling face and a heart of marble, he will squeeze and squeeze until he has drained them dry. That fellow is a genius in his own way, and would have made a mark on society if he had chosen a more honest trade. His method is as follows. He lets it be known that he is willing to pay very large sums of money for letters that compromise people of wealth and power. He receives such documents not only from treacherous servants or maids, but also frequently from ruffians, con men who have gained the confidence and affection of trusting women. He deals with no small hands. I happen to know that he once paid £700 to a footman for a 2-line note, and that the ruin of a noble family was the result. Every damaging secret on the market goes through Milverton, and there are hundreds in this great city who turn white at his name. No one knows where his blow might fall. He is cunning and will hold a card back for years in order to play it at the most damaging moment. I say to you that he is the worst man in London, and I would ask you, how could compare a ruffian who bludgeons his mate to death with a blind rage to this man who methodically and playfully tortures the souls of decent men and women in order to add to his already swollen bank books?
I had seldom heard my friend speak with such intensity of feeling. But surely this fellow must be within the grasp of the law.
Technically, no doubt, but not practically. What would it benefit a woman, for example, to get Milverton a few months' imprisonment if her own social ruin must immediately follow? No, his victims dare not hit back. If he ever blackmailed a truly innocent person, then indeed we would have him. But he is as cunning as the devil and picks his targets well. No, we must find other ways to fight him.
And why is he coming here?
Because an illustrious client has placed her case in my hands. It is the Lady Ava Blackwell, the most beautiful debutante in London. She is to be married in 2 weeks' time to the Earl of Dovercourt. Milverton has several imprudent letters. Imprudent, Watson, nothing worse. That she once wrote to a penniless young squire in the country. Their content would be enough to break off her engagement. Milverton will send the letters to the Earl unless a large sum of money is paid to him. I have been commissioned to meet him and make the best terms that I can.
In that instant, there was a clatter and a rattle in the street below. Looking down, I saw a stately carriage pulled up against the curb. A footman opened the door, and a small, stout man in a shaggy wool overcoat descended. A minute later, he was in our room. Charles Augustus Milverton was a man of 50, with a large intellectual head, a round, plump, hairless face, a perpetual frozen smile, and 2 keen gray eyes, which gleamed brightly from behind broad, gold-rimmed glasses. There was something of an almost Buddha-like benevolence in his appearance, marred only by the insincerity of the fixed smile and by the hard glitter of those restless and penetrating eyes. His voice was as smooth and suave as his countenance, as he advanced with a plump little hand extended, murmuring his regret for having missed us on his first visit. Holmes disregarded the outstretched hand and looked at him with a face of stone. Milverton's smile broadened. He shrugged his shoulders, removed his overcoat, folded it with great care over the back of a chair, and then took a seat, waving a hand in my direction.
This gentleman is discreet. Is it right?
Mr. Watson is my friend and partner.
Very good, Mr. Holmes. It is only in your client's interest that I protested. The matter is so very delicate.
Dr. Watson has already heard everything.
Then we can proceed to business. You say that you are acting for Lady Ava. Has she authorized you to accept my terms?
What are your terms?
£7,000.
And the alternative?
My dear sir, it is painful for me to discuss it, but if the money is not paid on the 14th, there certainly will be no wedding on the 18th.
His insufferable smile was more complacent than ever. Holmes sat back in his chair and thought for a little, speaking after a long pause.
You appear to me to be taking things too much for granted. I am, of course, familiar with the contents of these letters. My client will certainly do what I advise. I will counsel her that it would be best to tell her future husband the whole story and to trust his generosity and understanding.
Milverton chuckled.
From the way you say that, it was evident that you did not truly know the Earl.
From the baffled look upon Holmes's face, I could see clearly that he believed he did know the Earl, and that Milverton's words had disturbed him. When he spoke again, it was almost with a trace of nervousness in his voice.
What harm is there in these letters?
Milverton smiled his cold, dead smile, and I understood in a moment what my friend had meant in comparing him to the serpents in their cages at the zoo.
Oh, they're sprightly. Very sprightly. The lady was a charming correspondent, quite colorful. But I can assure you that the Earl of Dovercourt would fail to appreciate them. However, since you seem to think otherwise, we might as well let it rest at that. It is purely a matter of business after all. If you think that it is in the best interest of your client that these letters should be placed in the hands of the Earl, then you would indeed be foolish to pay so large a sum of money to regain them.
Milverton rose and seized his luxurious heavy coat from its place over the chair, turning to leave. Holmes's face flushed red as he leapt from his seat.
Wait a moment. A moment. Sir, I'm sure we might be able to come to some arrangement.
Milverton turned back towards us with a smile, but his eyes were dead and cold. And with that, we've reached the end of part 1 in our 5-part adaptation of this story. What deal might Holmes try to make with this appalling man in order to protect his client? And will Milverton accept it, whatever it might be? Join us again tomorrow evening to find out as the great detective Sherlock Holmes bumps heads with a most worthy intellectual opponent here on BeFM Drama.